The island across the water had always been a part of my life, a fixture in the background of my childhood memories, its silhouette forever etched against the horizon like an unfinished painting. Situated just beyond the bay where our small fishing village lay nestled, it was close enough to see but far enough to remain untouchable, surrounded by swirling legends and whispered fears. My grandfather used to say that it was better to keep some mysteries at a distance not meant for us. He would warn, his eyes flicking towards the distant shape as though it could sense his thoughts. The island was called Innis Bridle, the Spirit Isle. Stories of strange happenings and eerie sights were woven into the fabric of our community. Fishermen spoke of sudden fogs that would envelop their boats, leaving them drifting and disoriented. Others mumbled about shadows moving against the wind, figures glimpsed only in the corner of the eye. Children dared each other to swim closer, only to retreat with tales of chilling waters and unseen currents pulling them back. Yet, despite the pervasive sense of foreboding, life in the village continued as it always had, steady and undisturbed. My own relationship with the island was one of fascination tempered with caution. I would often sit at the end of the pier, watching the water lap against the wooden posts, and let my eyes wander to the distant shores of Innis Bridle. It seemed unremarkable in many ways, a dense growth of trees, a few rocky prominences, and what appeared to be the remains of an old stone building barely visible through the foliage. A place like any other, if not for the feeling that something was subtly out of place. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, I noticed something unusual. A light flickered on the island, a brief pulse of brightness that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. It happened again, and then once more, as if someone were signaling from the shadows of the trees. My heart quickened with an unbidden excitement, a feeling of being on the cusp of discovering something long hidden. I told myself it was probably nothing more than a trick of the light, but curiosity had already taken root in my mind. The first disturbance came a few days later. A fisherman, a stout man named Reese, returned to the village visibly shaken. He claimed his boat had been pulled towards the island by some invisible force, the waters around him churning as though alive with their own intent. His hands trembled as he recounted how he had fought against the current, finally breaking free just as he felt a presence, a watchful gaze, observing him from the island shores. His story would have been dismissed as a mere product of an overactive imagination, if not for the deep fear reflected in his eyes. It was a fear that echoed in the hearts of others as well. The village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next inexplicable occurrence. Days stretched into nights, and the sense of unease grew, casting long shadows over our daily routines. People spoke in hushed tones, their eyes continually drawn to the outline of Innis Bridle, which seemed to loom larger and more oppressive with each passing day. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, I found myself drawn to the island more than ever. It was as though a silent call resonated within me, urging me to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath its canopy. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and a need to dispel the rising dread, I resolved to make the crossing, to set foot on the island and confront whatever truth lay in wait. The morning of my departure was shrouded in mist, the village still slumbering under a blanket of fog. I had prepared a small rowboat the night before, checking it meticulously for leaks and ensuring I had everything I might need for the short journey. Pushing off from the pier, I felt a thrill of anticipation mingled with a thread of fear, the kind that comes when one steps into the unknown. The waters were calm, almost unnaturally so, as I rowed steadily towards Innis Bridle. The island grew larger with each stroke, its features becoming more distinct, A jagged coastline, dense thickets of green, and that mysterious stone building, crumbling yet defiant against the encroaching nature. As I neared the shore, I felt a peculiar sensation wash over me, a tingling along my skin, as though the air itself carried an electric charge. Stepping onto the island, I was struck by the silence. It was a profound stillness, broken only by the whisper of leaves and the distant cry of a seabird. The sense of wrongness, which had been a distant murmur, now thrummed like a heartbeat, each pulse a reminder that I was somewhere I ought not to be. Yet, there was no turning back. I had to see it through. I followed a narrow path that wound its way through the trees. The ground soft beneath my feet, the world seemed to narrow around me, the canopy overhead closing in, blocking out the sky. I was aware of every sound, every crackle of a twig, every rustle of foliage. My heart pounded in my chest, the rhythm quickening with each step. When I finally reached the old stone building, I paused. It was larger than it had appeared from the water, its walls pocked and scarred by time. The door, hanging askew on rusted hinges, offered a dark invitation. Gathering my courage, I stepped inside. The interior was dim, shadows stretching across the floor like dark, greedy fingers. The air was musty, thick with a scent of decay and something else, something metallic. I moved cautiously, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. The walls were lined with strange symbols, carved deep into the stone, their meanings lost to time. It was then I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the room. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was not a person but a statue, eerily lifelike, its features obscured by the dust of years. It had an unsettling presence, as though it were more than mere stone. The longer I looked, the more I felt a connection, a thread linking me to this place, this presence. As I stood there transfixed, a sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on a table. It was coming from inside the walls. An insistent beat that resonated with the pulse of the island. I backed away, my previous courage slipping away like sand through my fingers. I stumbled out into the light, the sudden brightness blinding me momentarily. The island seemed different now, altered by the knowledge of what lay within its heart. I felt exposed, as though the trees themselves were watching me, assessing my intentions. The path back to the shore seemed longer, the air heavier, pressing down on me with a sense of impending doom. Reaching the boat, I pushed off with trembling hands, casting a last glance at the island. It stood silent and unmoving. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something within had awoken, something ancient and hungry. The crossing back to the village was fraught with an urgency I could not explain, my thoughts a chaotic whirl of images and impressions. Upon returning, I tried to speak of what I had seen, but the words failed me. There was no way to articulate the wrongness, the sense of being an intruder in a place that defied understanding. My explanations were met with skepticism, the villagers unwilling to entertain the notion of the island as anything more than a place left alone. In the days that followed, the island haunted my thoughts. I found myself drawn to the shore, my gaze inevitably sliding to that distant shape. The tapping sound echoed in my dreams, a relentless rhythm that seeped into my waking hours. I realized that whatever connection had been forged on the island, it was not one that could be easily severed. The climax of my fears came one stormy night, as the wind howled and rain battered the rooftops. I was awakened by a sense of urgency, a pull that drew me from my bed and out into the night. The village was dark, save for the occasional flicker of lightning, casting the world in stark relief. I found myself at the water's edge before I knew it, staring across the roiling waters to Ynys Ysbrydyl. The island loomed, a black mass against the tumultuous sky, and for a moment I thought I saw lights flickering once more among the trees. But it was the figure standing at the edge of the water that made my blood run cold. It was the statue, or something resembling it, a silhouette against the darkness. It stood there motionless as the storm raged around us. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I realized it was not alone. Shadows moved behind it, indistinct and shifting, like figures glimpsed in a fever dream. I backed away slowly, my instincts screaming at me to flee. Yet my feet seemed rooted to the ground. The storm's fury intensified, and in the chaos the figures on the shore began to dissolve into the night, leaving behind an emptiness that seemed to expand, threatening to engulf the very essence of the island. When the storm finally abated, I returned home, soaked and trembling. Sleep was elusive, my mind replaying the night's events in an endless loop. I knew then that I could not escape the island's grasp, that its secrets had become a part of me, woven into the fabric of my being. The lingering fear settled like a shroud over my existence, a constant reminder of that night and the unknown that lay beyond the familiar shores. The island across the water remained, a silent sentinel, its presence a whisper in my blood. The villagers spoke less of it, as though by ignoring it, they could banish the unease that had taken root. But I knew better. I understood that some mysteries were never meant to be solved, that some calls should remain unanswered. Ynys Ysbrydyl had become a part of me, its secrets a shadow in my soul. And though I could never return, never truly escape its grasp, I found a strange comfort in the knowledge that I would always carry a piece of the island within me, a reminder of the wrongness of familiar things and the haunting allure of the forbidden. The mist rolled in like a gentle tide, wrapping Arthurdeer in an early morning shroud. The coastal village was still, the only sound the distant cries of seagulls circling overhead. I settled into my usual routine, the one I'd kept for nearly 2 decades since I moved here, far from the suffocating clamor of city life. The scent of salt water and fresh bread mingled in the air as I stepped out of the bakery with a warm loaf tucked under my arm. My small cottage, perched precariously on the edge of the village, overlooked the vast expanse of sea, with Morgan's Isle just visible in the distance, a shadowy silhouette against the horizon. Morgan's Isle had always been more of a presence than a neighbor, its very existence a constant, often unnerving reminder of the unknown. The locals had their legends, of course, a fortress for Welsh kings, a pirate's lair, a cursed land claimed by the sea for some ancient misdeed. These stories were tales to entertain visitors and frighten children, nothing more. I had never put much stock in them, though the Isle's eerie aura could not be denied. It was on a day much like any other that the first disturbance occurred. I was sitting by my kitchen window, sipping my morning tea, when I heard it. A soft, lilting melody carried across the water. It was beautiful, haunting, a tune that seemed to wrap around my consciousness and pull at something deep within. I shook my head, dismissing it as an echo of the wind or the distant call of seabirds. Yet, as the days passed, the melody became a refrain I could not ignore. With each morning, the song grew clearer, more insistent. It was as if the very air had learned a new language and whispered it just for me. I found myself drawn to the window, compelled to listen. Though I couldn't quite discern the source, it was an unsettling but irresistible pull. Like a moth to a flame, my curiosity overcame my wariness, and on an overcast afternoon I decided to take the small rowboat I kept tied up at the village dock and venture closer to Morgan's Isle. The sea was calm, the water lapping gently against the boat as I rowed, the sound of the melody guiding me. As I drew nearer, the isle loomed larger, its rocky cliffs jutting into the sky, covered in patches of stubborn greenery. I felt a chill, a sense of being watched, though the isle appeared deserted. The song was clearer now, a woman's voice, ethereal and sad, calling from somewhere unseen. As I landed on the pebble-strewn shore, I hesitated, the song now a palpable presence that seemed to vibrate through the very stones at my feet. Curiosity won over caution as I carefully made my way inland, picking a path through the tangled undergrowth and weathered rocks. The island was still, save for the song that now seemed to resonate from its very heart. It wasn't long before I found her, or rather, she found me. In a clearing, surrounded by gnarled trees and wildflowers, stood a figure. A woman, her back to me, her long hair cascading like a waterfall of black silk down her back. She was singing, the melody flowing from her lips like a river of sound. I meant to speak, to call out, but found myself unable to utter a word. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that stole my breath away. Her face was pale, otherworldly, her eyes dark and deep as the ocean. She smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt an inexplicable sense of calm, as if I had found something I had been searching for my entire life. The woman gestured for me to come closer, and though every logical part of my mind screamed to turn back, I stepped forward, drawn by the invisible threads of her song. We spoke, or rather, she spoke and I listened, entranced by the lyrical cadence of her voice. Her name, she said, was Irian, and she had been waiting for someone to come, someone who could hear her call. Her words were cryptic, filled with riddles and half-truths, but I understood that she was as much a part of the isle as the rocks and trees. She was bound to it, and now it seemed so was I. I spent hours on that island, hours that felt like minutes, lost in her presence and the otherworldly beauty of her song. It was only as the sun began to dip toward the horizon that I realized how much time had passed. The spell seemed to break then, and a sense of urgency gripped me. I needed to return, to think, to understand. The journey back to the mainland was a blur. The melody lingered in my mind, a haunting echo of the encounter. As I reached my cottage, the reality of the day felt surreal, as if I had stepped into a dream. I told no one of my visit, not at first, fearful that speaking of it would somehow unravel the delicate web of enchantment that bound me to the memory. Yet, the song did not fade. Each morning, it was there, a siren call pulling at the edges of my consciousness. I found myself compelled to return to Morgan's Isle, the urge growing stronger with each passing day. The villagers began to notice my distraction, my frequent absences, and whispered among themselves, though they dared not ask directly. With each visit, Irian seemed more real, more substantial, and I found it harder to leave her side. She spoke of the island's history, of its secrets and its curse, weaving tales that both fascinated and unnerved me. There was a darkness to her words, a shadow that lingered just beneath the surface of her stories, hinted at but never fully revealed. As the days turned to weeks, I realized I was losing myself, the line between reality and the world Irian inhabited blurring. The island had become a refuge, a sanctuary from the mundane confines of village life. Yet, with each return to Arfodier, the shadows seemed to deepen, the villagers' unease more palpable. They had begun to notice that the song, once unheard, now drifted faintly into the village, a spectral melody that stirred ancestral fears. It was on a moonlit night that the climax of my strange odyssey unfolded. I had returned to the island, drawn as if by an invisible tether. The air was thick with tension, the song more powerful than ever. A siren's lament that echoed through my very soul. Annie was waiting, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Sorrow, longing, resignation. "You must choose," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Stay or leave, but know that your choice will bind you." Before I could respond, the air seemed to shift, a palpable energy radiating from the ground. The island itself seemed to tremble, and the song reached a crescendo, a mournful cry that resonated with ancient power. In that moment, I understood the truth. The island was alive, a sentient being with its own desires and its own needs. Irian was its voice, its heart, and now it wanted me. Fear gripped me, a cold, relentless force that shattered the enchantment. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, the realization of my peril crashing down upon me. Irian reached out, her eyes pleading, but there was a darkness in them now, a reflection of the island's true nature. I turned and ran, my mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The island seemed to resist, the path twisting beneath my feet, the trees closing in as if to trap me in their embrace. But desperation lent me strength, and I reached the shore, the rowboat waiting like a lifeline. The sea was fierce that night, the winds howling as if in protest. I rowed with frantic energy, the melody of the song lingering in my ears. Now, a mournful echo that tugged at my heart even as I fled. As I reached the village, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, and the song at last fell silent. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my old routines, but the village felt different, the world somehow less vibrant. The song haunted me still, a ghostly whisper at the edges of my mind. I spoke to no one of what had transpired, aware that my tale would sound like madness. Yet, the villagers seemed to know, their eyes on me with a mixture of pity and fear, as if they recognized a kindred spirit who had glimpsed the abyss. I felt the island's presence, the pull of its mysterious power, but I resisted, anchored by the fragile thread of reality that remained. As time passed, the song's hold weakened, and the island retreated into the background of my life, a shadow on the horizon, a secret I carried alone. But the fear lingered, a silent specter that haunted my dreams and whispered in the night. I knew that the island was waiting, patient and eternal, its siren call ever present, ready to ensnare another soul drawn to its enigmatic allure. The journey to Ethel's Rock was not one I had planned. It was more a compulsion that drew me from the edges of my everyday existence into the unknown. Ethel's Rock, a remote island in the Pacific, had been a whisper in the annals of exploration, a fragment of myth rather than a destination. When the chance arose to join a small expedition seeking to uncover its secrets, I found myself unable to resist. I had grown weary of my ordinary life, each day bleeding into the next with a relentless monotony. The prospect of the unknown, the promise of discovery, pulled at me like a tide. We were a modest group, just 4 souls, bound by a shared restlessness and the allure of uncharted territory. Our leader, Dr. Simon Caldwell, was a man of science and fervor, his life dedicated to unearthing the world's mysteries, his eyes gleaming with a fervent curiosity that was infectious. Evelyn Morton, an anthropologist with a penchant for lost cultures, possessed an insatiable hunger for ancient stories. Daniel Marsh, the group's geologist, was pragmatic and stoic, grounding us with his unwavering resolve. The journey to Athel's Rock was long and arduous, the vast ocean stretching endlessly beneath the sky's dome. The island's coordinates were vague, a blur on ancient maps, as if etched by a trembling hand. It appeared as a smudge in the cartographer's eye, elusive and spectral. Yet, as we sailed closer, the island emerged from the mist like a phantom, a jagged silhouette against the horizon. Athel's Rock stood solitary and unyielding, a fortress of basalt and verdant growth, untouched by the passage of time. Our first days on the island were consumed with a sense of normalcy, an exploratory thrill as we familiarized ourselves with the terrain. The island was captivating, its beauty marred only by a sense of foreboding that whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves with secrets. We set up camp on the beach, the rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore a constant, soothing presence. By day, we explored the dense forests, documenting flora and fauna, marveling at the rich diversity that flourished in isolation. By night, we gathered around the fire, sharing our findings, the camaraderie of shared purpose warming us against the encroaching darkness. The first disturbance was subtle, a mere ripple in our routine that I might have overlooked had I not been diligent in recording our daily activities. It began with the strange carvings we found on the trees, elaborate symbols etched into the bark, with an artistry that spoke of intent and tradition. Evelyn was fascinated, her fingers tracing the intricate lines with reverence, her eyes alight with the spark of discovery. Yet there was something unsettling about those symbols, something in their symmetry that seemed to hum with an energy I could not name. As the days passed, the disturbances grew more pronounced, manifesting in the landscape itself. Paths we had walked before shifted subtly. Landmarks vanished, only to reappear in unexpected places. The island seemed alive, its geography fluid and mercurial, as if it were testing us, probing our intentions. Dr. Caldwell dismissed these oddities as tricks of the mind, the result of fatigue and heightened imagination. But I noticed a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a shadow of uncertainty that betrayed his certainty. The escalation came with the discovery of the village, a hidden enclave nestled within the island's heart, shielded by a thicket of ancient trees. It was Eveline who found it, her intuition guiding us through the labyrinthine forest to a clearing where the remnants of a civilization lay shrouded in silence. The village was abandoned, its structures woven from bamboo and thatch, their decay graceful and dignified, as if time had paused to admire its handiwork. We explored the site with a reverent awe, our senses attuned to the echoes of a lost world. Among the ruins we found artifacts, pottery shards, tools hewn from stone, relics of a culture that had vanished without a trace. Evelyn was ecstatic, her enthusiasm infectious as she pieced together the fragments of a forgotten story. But there was an unease that coiled around us, a tension that thrummed beneath the surface like a distant drumbeat. The air was charged with a presence unseen, a watchfulness that set my nerves on edge. It was then that we began to hear the whispers, soft, insistent, carried on the wind. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks, the remnants of dreams clinging to the waking world. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct, weaving themselves into the fabric of our days. The others heard them too, though we spoke of it only in hushed tones, as if acknowledging them might give them power. The voices were in a language I could not understand, yet their cadence was familiar, echoing with an ancient rhythm that resonated deep within my bones. The climax of our journey arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper, a single voice cutting through the symphony of murmurs, clear and commanding. It was a woman's voice, ethereal and otherworldly, beckoning us deeper into the island's embrace. Against our better judgment, we followed, drawn by a compulsion we could not resist, as if the island itself had chosen us for a purpose we could not fathom. We found ourselves led to a sacred grove, a sanctuary of towering trees that arched overhead like cathedral spires. In the center of the grove stood a stone altar, worn smooth by time, its surface etched with the same symbols we had seen on the trees. The air was thick with anticipation, a stillness that settled over us like a shroud. As we approached the altar, the whispers swelled, a chorus rising in a crescendo that thrummed through my veins. In that moment, the world held its breath, time stretching into eternity as we stood on the brink of comprehension. I felt a connection, a thread linking us to the island's past, to the people who had once called it home. A vision unfolded before my eyes, a glimpse into a time long forgotten, a people who worshiped the island as a living entity, a guardian and guide. They danced in the grove, their bodies moving in harmonious rhythm, their voices lifted in song, a hymn to the island's spirit. Then, as quickly as it had come, the vision faded, leaving us in stunned silence. The whispers ceased, the air settling into a profound quiet that was both a relief and a loss. We stood there for a time, suspended in the aftermath, until the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the grove. It was then that we realized the significance of the journey, the island granting us a glimpse into its heart, a communion with the past that transcended time. As we made our way back to camp, a lingering fear settled over me, an awareness of the island's power and mystery. Ethel's Rock was more than a geographical anomaly, more than a speck on ancient maps. It was a living entity, a keeper of secrets and guardian of stories untold. I felt a deep respect for the island, a humble acknowledgement of its grandeur and might. In the days that followed, we prepared to leave, our hearts heavy with the knowledge that we had been touched by something beyond our understanding. The island had revealed its truth, but with it came a responsibility to honor its memory, to preserve the story it had shared. As we sailed away from Ethel's Rock, I felt its presence still, a shadow on the horizon, a whisper in the wind. Even now, back in the confines of civilization, the island haunts my thoughts, the specter of what lies beyond the known world. In quiet moments, I hear the whispers once more, a reminder of the journey, of the island that exists on the edge of the world. The fear lingers, a reminder of the mysteries that lie beyond the horizon, waiting to be discovered, their secrets etched into the fabric of the earth, their voices carried by the wind. I had always been drawn to the stories of the Olduvai Gorge, a place where the whispers of the past echoed against the ancient stones. Revered as the cradle of humankind, it was a site where every fragment of bone, every weathered stone, seemed to hold within it a history that stretched back millennia. It was a place where time seemed to lose its meaning, and past, present, and future felt as though they could exist simultaneously, brushing up against one another beneath the relentless Tanzanian sun. My journey to the gorge began with a seemingly innocuous expedition. As an archaeologist with a penchant for the unusual, I had been drawn to the tales of mysterious cave writings that had been discovered by local tribesmen, hidden away in a secluded part of the gorge. These writings, they claimed, were unlike any others seen before, not in their content, but in their style and language. Reports suggested that they bore a striking resemblance to modern English, a curiosity that piqued the interest of my colleagues and me. Upon arriving at the gorge, I was consumed by a sense of awe. The landscape was harsh yet beautiful, a testament to the endurance of life in the most unforgiving of conditions. As I made my way toward the caves, guided by a local tribesman named Juma, I felt an inexplicable pull, as though an unseen force was guiding my steps toward a destiny I could not yet comprehend. The cave itself was unremarkable from the outside, but as I stepped inside, the air seemed to thicken and a chill ran down my spine. Juma lit a torch, and the flickering light danced across the walls, revealing the carvings that had drawn me here. At first glance, they appeared to be nothing more than crude scratchings, but upon closer inspection, I could make out words, a plea etched into stone. Help. Lost. Time. Cannot return. The words were fragmented, yet their meaning was clear enough to send a shiver through my body. I could not shake the feeling that these words had been left for me, for anyone who might stumble upon them, a desperate cry reaching out across the ages. As I traced the lines with my fingers, my mind spun with the implications. Could it be possible that someone from another time had been stranded here, their only hope of rescue lying in the cryptic message they had left behind? This notion seemed absurd, yet, as an archaeologist, I knew that history was often stranger than fiction. Perhaps there were secrets hidden within the layers of time that mankind was never meant to uncover. Despite my skepticism, I felt compelled to learn more, to unravel the mystery that had entwined itself around my heart as tightly as the vines clinging to the trees outside. Over the following days, I dedicated myself to studying the writings, meticulously documenting each symbol and word. Juma, though initially skeptical of my interest, proved invaluable in helping me navigate the gorge and communicate with the local tribes. Together, we uncovered more carvings, scattered across the cave walls in a chaotic jumble, as though the writer had been desperate, racing against time itself. As I pieced together the fragments, a story emerged, one of a traveler lost in time, a victim of a failed experiment that had sent them spiraling back to an age not their own. Their words spoke of confusion, fear, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. They described a world both familiar and foreign, a land untouched by the trappings of modern civilization, yet teeming with life. The more I read, the more I felt a connection to this mysterious figure. Their plight resonated with me on a level I could not fully understand, as though their voice was echoing through the corridors of time, reaching out to me across the ages. I began to spend more and more time in the cave, poring over the writings in an attempt to decipher their full meaning. It was during one of these long, solitary sessions that I noticed something peculiar. The carvings had begun to change. New words appeared where there had been none before, and old phrases shifted and morphed as though the story itself was alive, reshaping itself with each passing moment. This realization sent a jolt of fear through me, a cold certainty that I was not alone, that I was being watched by unseen eyes. At first, I dismissed these thoughts as the product of an overactive imagination, the result of too many hours spent in the oppressive darkness of the cave. But as the days wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more insistent, until I could no longer ignore it. It was as though the gorge itself was a living entity, aware of my presence, and not entirely pleased by it. One night, as I lay in my tent, the sounds of the African night surrounding me, I was jolted awake by a voice, a soft, insistent whisper that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. "Help," it said, the word reverberating through my mind, filling every corner with a sense of urgency I could not ignore. Driven by a force I could not understand, I stumbled out into the night, my torch flickering in the cool breeze. The whispering grew louder, guiding me inexorably back toward the cave. As I entered, the air seemed to hum with energy, and the walls seemed to pulse with an inner light, illuminating the carvings that had become all too familiar. And then I saw it, a new line, freshly carved and shining in the torchlight. "You are the key," it read, the words sending a chill through my body. I stood frozen, the torchlight flickering wildly, casting shadows that danced and leaped across the walls. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, until it filled my mind, drowning out all thought. In that moment I understood. The traveler had not been abandoned, not entirely. They had reached out, across the vast expanse of time, and I had been drawn to their call. My presence in the gorge, my discovery of the writings. It was all part of a design, a plan to bridge the chasm between past and present. But what was I to do? How could I, a mere archaeologist, unlock the secrets of time and rescue a soul lost to history? The weight of the task pressed down upon me like the towering cliffs of the gorge itself, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, as though reality itself was coming undone. In a moment of desperation, I reached out, pressing my hand against the wall, tracing the lines of the words etched into the stone. As I did so, a surge of energy coursed through me, filling me with a warmth that seemed to emanate from deep within the earth. The whispering rose to a crescendo, and the world around me began to blur, to twist and fold upon itself like a dream. I don't know how long I stood there, caught between worlds, but when the sensation finally faded, I found myself alone in the darkness. The whispering gone, the cave silent once more. The words on the wall had shifted again, but this time they held no answers, only a simple message: "Thank you." The days that followed were a haze, my mind struggling to process what I had experienced. The writings remained, their mystery unsolved, and I could not escape the feeling that I had played a part in something far larger than myself. The gorge, with its ancient stones and whispered secrets, had reached out to me, and I had answered its call. As I prepared to leave, to return to a world untouched by the unraveling of time, I could not shake the lingering fear that had taken root within my heart. The knowledge that the past and present were not as separate as they seemed haunted my dreams, and I felt the weight of the traveler's fate pressing down upon me. As I boarded the plane that would carry me away from the cradle of humankind, I glanced back at the distant hills of the gorge, their shadows stretching long and dark across the landscape. The whispers of the past lingered in my mind, a reminder that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, and that the boundaries of time were more fragile than we could ever truly understand. The Wakala Leon sinks, a tangled web of underwater caves and limestone passages, have always held an allure for those who fancy themselves as adventurers. Their crystalline waters, deep and mysterious, draw divers from all over, each seeking the thrill of exploring what lies beneath. I had heard stories of the place, whispers of its beauty as well as its treachery, and as an amateur cave diver, it was a siren call I couldn't resist. I arrived on a crisp morning, the sun barely piercing through the dense canopy of trees that guarded the edges of the sinkholes. The air was thick with the earthy scent of the forest, mingling with the subtle tang of the water. It was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The tranquility of the place was deceptive, hiding the churning complexities below the surface. After setting up my gear and performing the routine checks, I slipped into the water. Its cool embrace was familiar and calming, like a second skin. As I descended, the sunlight danced on the surface above, fading into the shadows as I ventured deeper into the submerged labyrinth. The silence under the water was profound, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of my breathing. I had mapped out a route through the known caves, intentionally avoiding the less explored areas, particularly one passage divers ominously referred to as the Squeeze. It was a notoriously narrow section, rumored to be haunted or cursed. Stories circulated about divers who ventured in and never returned, though official records were scant on details. I dismissed these tales as exaggerations, cautionary folklore created to dissuade the inexperienced. As I swam through the ethereal blue, the contours of the stone walls around me were both familiar and alien, their surfaces carved by time and water into strange shapes that seemed to shift with the light. I felt a strange connection to these ancient stones, as if they were keeping silent watch over me. I was about an hour into my dive when I encountered the first disturbance. It was a shadow at the edge of my vision, something that darted out of sight just as I turned my head. Startled, I paused, my heart quickening. I scanned the darkness, but nothing moved. Just the play of light and shadow, I reassured myself. Yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, and I couldn't shake the sense of unease that settled over me. I pressed on, trying to focus on the beauty around me, but the water felt colder, the cave walls pressing closer. The silence was heavier now, no longer the comforting blanket it had been. It was as though the whole world had paused, holding its breath, waiting. The shadow returned, this time more pronounced, a fleeting glimpse of something that seemed out of place. It was slender and elongated, like a tendril reaching out, and then it was gone. My pulse raced, each beat a drum in the stillness. I turned on my flashlight, its beams slicing through the murky water, but saw nothing. The shadows danced on the walls, mocking my fear. Determined to shake off the growing dread, I decided to turn back, but as I retraced my path, the cave seemed unfamiliar. The familiar markers I had placed were gone, or perhaps I had missed them in my haste. Panic bubbled up inside me, a cold, creeping sensation that threatened to consume reason. It was then I found myself at the entrance of the Squeeze. The passage was narrower than I had imagined, a dark, gaping maw that seemed to breathe. I knew I shouldn't venture in, that I should find my way back to the surface, but something pulled at me, a quiet, insistent whisper that I couldn't ignore. Against all instinct, I entered the Squeeze. The walls closed in around me, the rocks scraping my elbows, my tanks barely fitting through. The sensation of being trapped was overwhelming, and I fought against the rising tide of claustrophobia. My mind screamed at me to go back, but the whisper urged me on, promising an end to the anxiety, a revelation just out of reach. The deeper I went, the more I felt the presence of something ancient and powerful, as if the very soul of the caves was aware of my intrusion. The whisper grew louder, a soft sigh that seemed to come from the stones themselves. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably mournful. A lament or warning. I was almost through the narrowest section when my tank snagged on an outcropping. Panic flared, and I twisted, trying to free myself. In my struggle, I dislodged a piece of rock, and the water around me darkened with silt. The visibility dropped to zero, and the weight of the rock seemed to increase, pressing down on me with a suffocating force. As I hung there, immobilized, the whisper was all I could hear. It caressed my mind, soothing and terrifying in equal measure. I felt a presence beside me, not seen but undeniably there, a companion in my entrapment. It was as if the cave itself was alive, its breath mingling with mine, its heart beating in tandem with my own. Time lost meaning in that liminal space. I could have been there for minutes or hours, suspended between fear and awe. The whisper never ceased, its rhythm like a lullaby. Slowly I began to calm, my breath steadying, my thoughts clearing. The silt around me settled, and with it, a path revealed itself. With careful movements, I untangled myself and pushed through the passage. There was a light ahead, faint but real, guiding me out of the constricting embrace of the squeeze. As I emerged, the cave opened up into a chamber I hadn't expected to find. It was vast, cathedral-like, with stalactites hanging like ancient chandeliers, their surfaces glistening in the dim light. In the center of the chamber was a figure, an outline barely visible through the water's veil. It was humanoid, yet otherworldly, a projection of the cave's own spirit, perhaps. It didn't move, but the whisper emanated from it, filling the space with its haunting melody. The figure was both beautiful and terrible, an embodiment of the cave's mystery. I found myself drawn to it, not in fear but in understanding. The whisper became clearer, a language I could almost grasp. It spoke of time and memory, of secrets buried in its stone, of life and death intertwined in the eternal dance of water and earth. As I hovered there, the figure seemed to dissolve, its essence spreading through the chamber, a gentle farewell. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving only silence in its wake. I made my way back to the surface, the journey uneventful, but charged with a new awareness. The water seemed warmer now, the light more welcoming as I ascended. Breaking the surface, I was greeted by the familiar sounds of the forest, their mundane reality grounding me. Yet something had changed. The tranquility of the sinkhole felt different, as if the world had shifted slightly. Its axis realigned. I climbed out of the water, my limbs heavy with fatigue and revelation. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows on the forest floor, a reminder of the shadow that had accompanied me below. Even as I packed up my gear and left the Wakala Leon sinks, the memory of the whisper lingered. It was a part of me now, woven into the fabric of my thoughts. The experience had been terrifying yet profoundly moving, a brush with the unknown that defied logic and reason. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back to the dive, replaying the events in my mind. The figure, the whisper, the feeling of being watched, they were imprinted on my soul. I couldn't escape the sensation that I was not alone, that some part of me had remained in the depths, a silent guardian of the secrets I had glimpsed. The fear, though no longer acute, was still present, a reminder of my vulnerability and the power of the Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves seemed to echo with the memory of that underwater whisper, a testament to the living spirit of the caves. I knew I would return to the Wakula Leon sinks, despite the danger and the dread. The pull of the place was irresistible, its mysteries a call I could not ignore. And though I feared what I might find, or what might find me, I felt an unshakable bond with those ancient waters. Perhaps it was madness, or perhaps it was enlightenment. Either way, the squeeze had left its mark, an indelible imprint that would guide my future explorations. I had come face to face with the supernatural, and though it had terrified me, it had also offered a glimpse of something greater, a fleeting connection with the eternal dance of nature and the spirit. In the quiet moments before sleep, I would hear the whisper again, soft and distant, carrying with it the promise of discovery and the shadow of fear. And in those moments, I would wonder if I was truly alone, or if the caves were watching, waiting for my return. The sky hung low and heavy over Crying Bay, a muted gray blanket that seemed to press down on the horizon. The bay was a place of natural beauty, a small cove just north of Eureka, California, where the craggy shoreline met the restless Pacific Ocean. The name Crying Bay had always intrigued me, though its origin was lost to time, leaving only the sound of waves as they perpetually whispered against the rocks. The world might have moved on, bustling with its own vibrant chaos, but here in Crying Bay the pace was deliberate, almost meditative. I had come to this remote stretch of coast in search of solitude, my soul weary from the ceaseless demands of city life. As a writer, my mind often wandered to places unexplored, both within and without. Crying Bay was intended to be my refuge, a retreat to cleanse my thoughts and perhaps spark the creative flame that had grown cold. I rented a small cabin perched precariously on the cliffs overlooking the bay, its windows offering a panoramic view of the ocean's vast expanse. The first few days were blissfully uneventful, my time spent strolling along the beach, the salty wind in my hair and the sand yielding underfoot. The cry of seagulls punctuated the rhythmic crash of distant waves, and I found a strange comfort in the monotony of it all. I wrote sporadically, my thoughts meandering like the trails left by crabs across the beach, but the words came easier here, as if the bay itself whispered secrets that begged to be told. It was on the evening of the fourth day that I noticed something unusual, a dark shape emerging from the water's embrace, stranded on the sand as if the sea had finally tired of it. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than driftwood, or perhaps the carcass of a whale left to decay. But as I ventured closer, curiosity piqued, its true form became apparent, a submarine. Its dark hull stark against the pallor of the beach, rusted and worn, a relic of a bygone era. I approached cautiously, compelled by a blend of fascination and unease. The submarine's design was unmistakably Japanese, its lines and structure reminiscent of the early 20th century. How it came to rest here, so far from the waters of its origin, was a mystery. Its presence was incongruous, like a ghost out of time, and as I stood before it, the wind seemed to carry a chill that belied the season. The first disturbance came not from the submarine itself, but from what it held within. As I circled its bulk, I discovered an open hatch, its seal broken and gaping. The interior was dark, the air stale and oppressive, as if it had been sealed for decades. Something compelled me to peer inside, a morbid curiosity that I couldn't quite shake. The beam of my flashlight revealed a scene that was both fascinating and horrific. A jumble of skeletal remains, scattered haphazardly, some still clad in tattered uniforms. The sight was unsettling. A tableau of death frozen in time, and I retreated hastily, my heart pounding. There were no signs of violence, no immediate indication of what had claimed these lives, and yet the scene spoke of something deeply unnatural. I spent that night in restless contemplation, the images etched into my mind, and struggled with an unease that clung to me like the mist. The following days brought an escalation of the strange occurrences. I was not alone in my discovery. Soon others came, drawn by the same inexplicable pull. Locals, tourists, and even researchers all converged upon the bay, each with their theories and speculations. The air buzzed with the energy of shared curiosity, and yet, beneath it, There was an undercurrent of fear, as if the submarine's appearance had awakened something best left undisturbed. Rumors began to circulate, stories of a curse, of spirits trapped within the metal confines, unable to find peace. Some spoke of an engineered biological threat, a secret weapon aboard the submarine that had turned on its creators. Theories abounded, each more outlandish than the last, and yet none could provide a satisfying explanation for the eerie phenomena that accompanied the submarine's presence. I found myself inexplicably drawn to the site, compelled to unravel its mysteries despite the growing sense of dread. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept across the bay, I returned once more to the submarine. The mood was different now, the air dense with anticipation. A low hum seemed to emanate from the hull. A vibration felt more than heard, as if the very atoms of the submarine were restless. As I stood transfixed, the hatch creaked open of its own accord, a groan of metal that sent shivers down my spine. And then came the whispers, faint, almost imperceptible, like the rustle of leaves in a breeze. But these were no natural sounds. They formed words, voices layered upon one another, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My mind struggled to make sense of it, and yet there was a familiarity to the cadence, as though the words were just beyond the edge of comprehension. The climax came abruptly, a crescendo of sensation that left me breathless. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that prickled at my skin. I staggered back, stumbling over the uneven sand. My eyes locked on the submarine as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Shapes flickered at the edge of my vision, shadows, indistinct and ephemeral, swirling around the submarine like a macabre dance. And then it stopped. Silence descended, heavy and profound, broken only by the distant crash of waves. The submarine stood unchanged, a silent sentinel against the backdrop of the night. But I knew in that moment that something had shifted, that the bay was no longer the same. In the days that followed, the lingering fear persisted, a specter haunting my thoughts. The submarine remained beached, a monument to mysteries unsolved, its secrets locked away from prying eyes. The whispers, though faded, still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the encounter that had shaken me to my core. I wrote feverishly, pouring my experience onto the page in a desperate attempt to make sense of it all. The lines between reality and imagination blurred, and my dreams were filled with images of the submarine, the voices, the shadows. Crying Bay had become more than a retreat. It was a threshold, a place where the veil between worlds grew thin and the past bled into the present. As I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bay wasn't through with me yet. The air felt different, charged with a potential that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The world beyond seemed distant, inconsequential, as if everything that mattered lay within the bounds of this secluded cove. I lingered on the beach one final time, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. The submarine was a silhouette against the dying light, enigmatic and eternal. I knew I would carry its story with me, a reminder of the uncanny beauty that lay hidden beneath the surface of the world. And as I turned to leave, a breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the faintest echo of a whisper, a promise perhaps, or a warning of things yet to come.